Have you ever wondered if the quietest person in the room might actually hold the most powerful story? Before we begin, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because stories like this remind us that the people we overlook might one day change how we see the world. The rain had just begun to fall outside the tall glass building of Hargrove International. Inside, most of the lights were off. Employees had long gone home, leaving the echo of footsteps in empty hallways. But one office on the top floor was still glowing. Ethan Hargrove, the CEO of the billion-dollar company, sat behind his sleek desk staring at spreadsheets that refused to make sense. His company was struggling. Investors were nervous. Competition was growing. For the first time since inheriting the company from his late father, Ethan felt uncertain. He rubbed his eyes and leaned back. That's when he noticed something unusual through the glass wall of his office. Down on the lobby floor, a janitor was mopping. That alone wasn't strange. What caught Ethan's attention was the way the man moved, slow, thoughtful, almost precise. Like someone who carried a heavy past. Ethan had seen him before. The quiet janitor who never spoke much. Older man, gray hair, always arrived after everyone left. His name, if Ethan remembered correctly from HR records, was Daniel Carter. Normally Ethan would have ignored it. But tonight, something felt different. As Ethan packed his briefcase and headed to the elevator, he noticed Daniel finishing his shift. The old janitor hung his mop carefully, wiped his hands, and quietly walked out the building. Instead of heading home, Daniel walked toward the parking lot, and kept going. Curious, Ethan slowed his steps. Something about the man's routine felt deliberate. So Ethan did something he had never done before. He followed him. Daniel walked several blocks through dimly lit streets. The rain grew heavier, but he didn't seem to mind. Eventually he turned into a small neighborhood Ethan had never visited. Old brick buildings, flickering streetlights, the kind of place CEOs rarely step into. Daniel stopped in front of a modest community center. The sign above the door read, Hope Haven Youth Center. Ethan frowned. Why would a janitor come here so late? Through the window, Ethan saw something that made him pause. Inside the room were about 15 kids sitting at desks. And Daniel, the quiet janitor, stood at the front holding a piece of chalk. He was teaching. Ethan stepped closer. Daniel's voice, calm and warm, filled the room. Remember, he told the kids, numbers are not the enemy. They're just puzzles waiting for patience. The kids laughed. One boy raised his hand. Mr. Carter, how do you do those equations so fast? Daniel smiled softly. Practice, he said, and a lot of mistakes along the way. Ethan felt a strange pull in his chest. This wasn't what he expected. For the next hour he watched through the window as Daniel patiently helped each child solve math problems, encouraged them when they got frustrated, and celebrated every small victory like it was the greatest achievement in the world. When the class finally ended, the kids surrounded him with hugs before leaving. Daniel stayed behind, stacking chairs. That's when Ethan finally stepped inside. The door creaked. Daniel looked up. For a moment, surprise flashed across his face. Mr. Hargrove, he said gently. Didn't expect to see you here. Ethan cleared his throat. I followed you. Daniel didn't seem offended. Just curious. Why? Ethan hesitated. I wanted to know why a janitor works a second job teaching kids algebra at night. Daniel chuckled quietly. This isn't a job. Then what is it? Daniel looked around the small room. Its purpose. Ethan studied him carefully. You're clearly overqualified for cleaning floors. Daniel smiled faintly. I've had other careers. Ethan leaned against a desk. What kind of careers? Daniel was silent for a moment. Then he said something that made Ethan's heart skip. 30 years ago, I designed the core algorithm your company still uses today. Ethan froze. That's impossible. But Daniel simply walked to a cabinet and pulled out an old folder. Inside were faded documents, blueprints, handwritten formulas. Ethan's eyes widened. It was the original framework of Hargrove International's logistics system, the one Ethan's father had always claimed to create. Where did you get this? Ethan whispered. Daniel's voice was calm. Because I wrote it. Ethan's mind raced. My father invented that system. Daniel shook his head slowly. No, your father funded it. The room felt suddenly smaller. Daniel continued gently. I was the lead engineer. The architect of the algorithm. Ethan felt like the ground shifted beneath him. Then why are you a janitor? Daniel sat down in a chair. Because sometimes life doesn't follow the path you expect. Years ago, Daniel had worked with Ethan's father on the system that eventually made the company famous. But when investors pushed for control, credit shifted. Daniel was pushed out quietly. No lawsuits, no public fight, just silence. Why didn't you expose it? Ethan asked. Daniel shrugged lightly. I had a young daughter. Medical bills. I needed stability more than recognition. And later, Daniel smiled sadly. Later, the world moved on. Ethan stared at the papers. His father, the man he admired his entire life, had taken credit for another man's brilliance. The weight of that realization hit hard. But why work at the company now? Ethan asked. Daniel looked thoughtful. I wanted to see what became of the thing I helped create. He paused. And cleaning floors gives you a lot of time to think. Ethan laughed quietly despite the heavy moment. I can't believe this. Daniel stood and walked toward the window where the rain tapped softly against the glass. I don't regret it, he said calmly. Not even a little. Daniel shook his head. Recognition fades, but impact, that stays. He gestured toward the door where the kids had left earlier. Those kids, they're the future. If even one of them builds something better than we did, that's enough for me. Ethan felt something shift inside him. For years he had been chasing profits, approval, expectations. But this quiet janitor had lost everything, and still found purpose. The next morning, the entire company gathered for an unexpected meeting. Employees filled the conference hall whispering nervously. Ethan stood on stage. Beside him stood Daniel, looking uncomfortable in borrowed formal clothes. Ethan took a deep breath. For decades, he began, this company has celebrated a story that isn't entirely true. Murmurs filled the room. Ethan continued. The system that built our success was not designed by my father alone. He turned toward Daniel. It was designed by the man who has been quietly cleaning our floors. Gasps spread through the crowd. Ethan's voice grew firm. Today we correct that. He announced Daniel Carter as the original architect of the company's technology, and offered him a role as senior advisor with full recognition. The room erupted into applause. Daniel looked overwhelmed, but what he said next surprised everyone. I'll accept the recognition, he said softly. But only if the company also funds the Hope Haven Youth Center. Ethan smiled. Done. Months later the youth center expanded into a full learning institute for underprivileged students. Daniel led the education programs. And Ethan visited often, not as a CEO, but as a student, because sometimes the greatest teachers aren't the ones standing on stages. They're the quiet people mopping floors, carrying stories no one bothered to hear. So remember this. Never underestimate someone because of their job. The janitor you pass in the hallway might be a forgotten genius. The quiet stranger might hold wisdom worth more than millions. And sometimes, the person the world overlooked, is the one who teaches us how to see clearly. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who needs inspiration, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. Because the next story might change the way you see the world.